quick recap. So we've done 2 webinars so far. The first webinar was a few weeks ago. Mark introduced us to the Lean Transformation Framework. And earlier on Monday, I did a bit on getting ready for Japan. So I hope everybody's feeling comfortable, confident in the plan getting to Japan. It should be fairly easy. But again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out and ask me. I made a bit of a blunder last webinar. I failed to introduce 2 other people who are going to be joining us during the week. So of course there's going to be Mark, Jim, Mr. Yokoi. Gene Cunningham will also be joining us. I think some of you know Gene. For those of you who don't, Gene is currently the executive chairman and interim CEO of the Lean Enterprise Institute. She was the CFO of Landtech during their lean transformation, which was documented by Jim in the book Lean Thinking. And she is the author of The Value Add Accountant in Real Numbers. If any of you are doing lean in the office or lean in finance, you're probably familiar with these books, as Jean was a real pioneer in bringing lean thinking to finance and the back office. So we're very excited that Jean will be joining us during the week. Additionally, a gentleman named Carl Ohaus will also be joining. Carl is an LEI faculty member. He's been a great friend of LEI for many years. He's also partner of Lean Transformation Group and co-author of a book called Perfecting Patient Journeys, about applying lean thinking to the healthcare industry. Additionally, several of you are working with Carl currently. We have companies American Licorice, Miller Fabrication Solutions, United Plastic Fabricating, and Unicor, all doing work with Carl. So they're quite lucky to have their coach on board the bus. So a lot of firepower when it comes to knowledge and expertise with us during the week. And one more thing before I hand it over to Jim. I sent a note out the other day about luggage. This is a boring but important matter. And sorry if you can hear an airplane flying overhead. We're not that far from Logan Airport. Please pack an overnight bag. The reason for this request is we will be boarding the Shinkansen bullet train from Fukuoka to Nagoya. The Shinkansen is not a suitcase-friendly train. There's just not space for large items. So we are going to be using a handy courier service. We will leave our bags at the hotel in Fukuoka. A truck is going to transport them to Nagoya overnight. However, they won't be there until Wednesday afternoon. So you will need to pack an overnight bag with clothes for Tuesday evening, as well as Wednesday. Also, please let me know if you plan to pack more than 1 large suitcase. They need an accurate count so that they can confirm we have enough space. Now, the maximum size for a suitcase is something like 62 linear inches, which is the standard max size for international checked bags. If you're bringing more luggage than that, I would advise you to not. That should be plenty of space to pack everything that you need. Okay, that's it on the boring stuff. And now I will hand it over to Jim. Jim is the founder of the Lean Enterprise Institute and now serves as senior advisor to the Lean Enterprise Institute. Very excited that he'll be joining us throughout the week. I won't spend any more time introducing him, as I think you're already familiar. So Jim, take it away.
Okay. So let's see here. Matt is going to do autocorrect. Anytime I say something wrong, he will roll over here and just knock me out of the way and get it right. That's a good thing. Let's see, 22 years ago, I founded LEI, and it's been a great 22 years, but I am now simply the senior advisor, which means that when they want me to do something and I want to do it, I do it. And they wanted me to come on this Japan trip. And hey, I've been going to Japan since 1971. And always up for a trip to Japan. I think this is about my 30th trip to Japan over those years. And I always see something that A, I can't believe, and B, is really interesting. So I'm looking forward to seeing at least one thing is really interesting that I can't quite believe what I'm seeing. And those of you who've not been there before, this will be great fun. And those who have been there before, it will also be great fun. So what I'm trying to do today is just talk a little bit about management. The objective here is to put lean management, which is to say Toyota management. That's the best example we've got in context. So I'm going to talk just for a few minutes about 3 ways to think about management. As I do this, you might want to ask what kind of management system you have. And there's no correct answer. We think there's a better answer and a worse answer, but there's no correct answer. And so I'm going to just spend a few minutes to go through. The 3 kinds of management we'll talk about are traditional, which is since the beginning of time. It's how Noah did the Ark project, how the Pharaohs did the Pyramid project, how most companies have run through history. Modern management, which was introduced progressively, but really came fully into being at General Motors around 1919 when Alfred Sloan came in to save the company. And we'll talk more about that later. And then lean, which really was brought into being quite consciously by the senior leadership at Toyota in the mid-1960s. The world today, we actually have some data on this. At the MIT Sloan School, they have been running a global management survey for many years, interviewed something like 40,000 companies to see what kind of management system people have. Those people, despite my best efforts, have never heard of lean at the Sloan Management School at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, I'm sad to say. But they do have 2 categories. One is traditional, which they reckon about 40% of the world's companies could be called traditional. And about 60% they say are modern. Well, I don't know, that's what they say. My guess is we've got about 0.01% lean, but we're working on it. And maybe we'll do better over time. Let's see, Matt is explaining to me. What did you do?
I tapped the mouse. I don't know why.
Yeah, it was working before, not now. Okay, real quickly, traditional management, leader, top dog, dictator. They're benevolent dictators and malevolent dictators, but a traditional system, basically, the founder, the owner, whomever, is pretty clearly the boss. And the critical issue tends to be your relationship with the boss. Not much in the way of quantitative measures of performance. The leader says, hey, here are my folks, they're with me, one for all for one, and they're going to do what I say. The North Star is set by the senior leader. Perhaps the North Star is the senior leader. And loyalty is really important. So that's just the way the world has worked. All businesses, I think, are born in their first days as either traditional or lean, and we'll get back to that in a minute. Not as modern. That's what typically happens when a traditional business grows and it doesn't get to lean. So we'd like to get everybody to lean. That modern management, as I say, came in at the beginning of the 20th century. It was devised to deal with simply the growing scale of giant enterprises like car companies and steel companies and so forth. The fellow who really put it down on paper was Alfred Sloan at General Motors, who was the chairman after 1919. In 1965, he wrote a book called My Years with General Motors. If you haven't read that, you could. It is the operating manual for a modern management company. And that date is of significance. And then lean management was consciously created at Toyota in the mid-1960s, led by Eiji Toyota. Remember that we start out with Sakichi, who was the guy with the looms at the beginning of the 20th century, and then his son Kiichiro said, I don't like looms, I want to do cars. That was in 1935. Launched their first terrible automobile in 1937. And then his cousin, Eiji, then took on the company after Kiichiro had to quit in the bankruptcy of 1950. And so he was booted out, did not come back. Eiji was the cousin. And then they went back to the family line with Shoichiro, who was the next chairman, and then Akio, who was the current CEO. So that's Toyota with a D, not Toyota with a T. That Toyota with a D means fragrant rice field or something like that, and they thought it was the wrong kind of name for a car company. Toyota with a T doesn't mean anything apparently in Japanese, and that was good for marketing reasons. By the way, they were, in addition to the management system, There were 4 other elements to the enterprise system, the lean enterprise system, which is product process development, supplier management, customer support, and last I've listed the fulfillment system, which is Taiichi Ohno's TPS. And it's not clear which of those is most important. My own view is that the lean management system was critical to being able to support the TPS system and the other systems, but people could reasonably disagree. That's my view. Now, the lean management system really has 3 elements, and you've heard these. One is strategy deployment, which is setting direction. But it's not just setting direction. Any dictator can do that. It's gaining alignment so that the folks down in the trenches actually believe this is the right direction and have given their thoughts about how do we get that direction going rather than just being told. A3 analysis, which is how you deploy on Hoshin. Also how you deploy on countermeasures when you have a problem. Daily management, which of course is standardized work for management to address problems in real time across the organization so that you create and sustain that wonderful thing, basic stability, that most modern management and traditional management organizations just don't have. And then practicing Hoshin, practicing A3, practicing daily management is the management development system in a lean enterprise. That's how you learn. Don't go to the Harvard Business School. Don't go to the Sloan School, definitely. But go to the Gemba and practice Hoshin, practice A3, practice daily management. As you may hear while we're there, that people come into Toyota either at age 18 to be frontline workers in the plants or at age 22 from university. And Toyota tells them, you know how to read, that's good. You know how to write, that's good. You know how to do math, that's good. Forget everything else. Forget everything else. And we're going to teach you, and you're going to learn what you need. For those of you who have read John Shook's Managing to Learn, and I hope all of you have read that, the example in that book was John's first task when he became a manager. The first foreigner basically as a manager in the Toyota Motor Company Japan Limited. And he walked in on his first day as a manager. He had been making cars and trying to do a few things in engineering and purchasing before that. But when he really went to work as a manager, he came in, on his desk was a blank piece of A3 paper, and his boss had written technical document translation. That was all. What's the situation? Please grasp the situation and tell me what you think. So that was the beginning of John's management education, and that went on for all the years that he was at Toyota doing those things. There's some beliefs underlying the lean system. And hey, I just deduced these. I don't know that you'll find these written down anywhere. Continuity is good. That means customers for life, suppliers for life, employees for life, and that's always their expectation when you join Toyota, that you will be there for life. And that these things, customers, suppliers, employees, can be assets rather than just cost. And that's not the way a lot of modern management, traditional management companies think. Second, velocity is good. It's always cheaper and better to go faster. The velocity belief at Toyota was born in the bankruptcy of 1950. The Toyota folks had believed a rosy forecast that came from the sales and marketing group, and they had very long lead times, so they were really cranking out very slowly a lot of vehicles that it turned out nobody wanted, because it was a brief depression in Japan in 1950, engineered by the occupation to break the back of inflation. And so they ran out of cash, they went bust. And the banks took the company over as the key lenders and broke it in two. Toyota family lost almost all of their equity. And the senior manager said, this will never happen again. And Taiichi Ohno said, the purpose of TPS is very simple: to go from order to cash as quickly as possible. We want the cash. We need the cash. Third point, waste can always be reduced. And perfection is always the goal. Of course, that's not going to, you're not going to get there, but that is the objective. Fourth point, always start by analyzing the value creating work. Start from the bottom and go backwards rather than from the top and go down. And the work of management, the value creating work of management, is to enable and optimize the value creating work. That's what managers are supposed to do. They enable value creating work. The traditional manager Don't forget, this is the dictator says, do it my way. And the modern manager says, do it your way, but make your numbers, okay? Which is really an amazing thing. Do it my way. How can the guy at the top know this is going to work? And the modern manager says, do it your way. I don't know how it works anyway, but I'm keeping score. So make those numbers and off we go. And of course, the lean stance was, let's do it together through intense dialogue about the value creating process and how to improve it. The lean manager, at least in theory, doesn't say how to do it, says, but you tell me how you're going to do it and how I can help. We need to talk about this. And that's different. This innovation of lean management, which I believe was a very significant innovation, was a conscious decision by Eiji Toyota and the senior leaders that Toyota could not compete against GM, who was their target company, if they used GM's management system. And they knew quite a lot about GM's management system because in 1965, as they were really getting into this, Alfred Sloan at age 90 had actually written down the GM modern management system in my years of General Motors. So they got a hold of it. They had it translated very quickly. They had executive study group in Japan and said, gosh, here's how General Motors does it. They're the most successful company in the world at this point in time. We're going to do better. They just said that. We're going to do better. And so what are we going to do as managers that's different from and better than what the GM guys are doing? So that led to a global contest in two companies between lean and modern, Toyota and GM as the ideal types. And so we can, I think, get some insight on this by just going through a little exercise of comparing lean management with modern management. And I'm going to do that in just a minute. But first, just one more word about the world of traditional management. Whoa, that was a mistake. Word should be world. Again, three choices. Traditional management tends to be the small firm. Called it the School of Common Sense. Modern management, the Alfred Sloan School of Management. That's a little joke. I've done a lot of things with the Sloan School at MIT over the years, where I'm not allowed to teach this kind of thing. And then there is lean management, the Eiji Toyota Gimba School of Management. So just one more word about traditional management. It's really striking that you can really build a big company with traditional management. That Steve Jobs in the early years was absolutely a dictator traditional manager. And then he very fortunately found Tim Cook, who basically turned Apple into, in my view, mostly a modern management company. But that was better than just having a crazy dictator Steve. And what you have with that dictator system is that there are really very few feedback loops. My favorite traditional manager, dictator manager, of course, at the moment is Elon Musk. And Musk has built a company that has, 12,000 people, in which the thing to do is to ask Elon. And whenever Elon says to do something, just do it. And they have had just tremendous turnover in the management ranks, I think, as people come to him and say, this is crazy, it can't work. And he says, sure it can, as soon as we fire you. So it's an amazing thing to watch. The metaphor there is Musk sleeping at the end of the assembly line to spur the lads on to get the cars out. That's just the most ludicrous thing you can imagine, and yet many of the Musk fans honestly believe that's a great way to run a company. So, one of the many things wrong with this is that there just isn't any method for steady improvement. If there is a problem, you ask the boss, and the boss will tell you what to do, and your job is to do it. Lots of other traditional managers around, as I say, you can build a big company for a while. One of those was Henry Ford. At Ford, after he invented the Model T in 1908 and then invented the moving assembly line in 1914, suddenly had this gargantuan enterprise. And he was proud of saying, fond of saying, that there was no organization chart at the Ford Motor Company. If there was an issue, he would give you the answer. That's amazing. He would say that, and built the world's largest company for a brief period of time until GM with modern management was able to pass him. So in modern times, modern management became the standard way of managing, really. The business schools taught this. It was elaborated by GE. They just sold their headquarters property around the corner from us. We were looking forward to going over there and getting it sorted out. That's for the GE people, the ex-GE people on the trip. And Peter Drucker, management by objectives and so forth, is just another version of management by KPIs. So it became quite common. So let me just do a little comparing now of modern management. And on each of these slides, that will be in normal type on the upper part of the slide with lean management, which will be in italics below. And what might make this exercise useful is for you to say, what kind of management system do you have in your company? Okay. And by the way, maybe it's traditional management, and that's okay. But in trying to think about lean, it's really useful to say, well, wait a minute, what's our starting point? Let's grasp the current situation. If you're a traditional management company, great. If you're a modern management company, great. But you really ought to know that as you think about, I hope, wanting to become a lean management company. And most of you are leaders who would be involved in actually creating a lean management company if that turns out to be what you want to do. So modern versus lean, modern at the top. Primary focus of the modern organization was on the vertical functions and the departments as mechanisms of optimization and control. The thing that people were just terrified of as they got into these big enterprises, including traditional dictators, was that it just got to be too big and it got out of control. General Motors was built by a crazy kind of guy, Billy Durant, and was founded in 1908, went bankrupt in 1910, went bankrupt a second time in 1919. In both cases, because they simply ran out of cash. They didn't have the mechanisms to even tell them how much cash they had. And so Sloan came in and said, I've got to establish control. And I will do that through a system of key objectives, KPIs, and with a finance system that gathers all of the data so that I can control the business. But the concern was that wouldn't be flexible, because the understanding, if you're Alfred Sloan, he had today, back then, almost 1 million employees. He can't, he said, tell them all what to do. How does he know they're doing the right thing? And so, yes, there's control, but also you need to give them some latitude. And the answer was, say, do it your way, just make your numbers. Now, Sloan had a little bit more to his system, that he spent most of his time as CEO going around the country and around the world interviewing managers at the upper middle level to figure out who had the bandwidth to be promoted because they could think about the whole enterprise. The minute that Sloan stepped down, the finance guys took over and said, why waste all that time riding around in railroad cars? Just give them the KPIs and tell them to make their numbers. And so then it really became a truly complete modern system. In contrast, at the bottom is lean. Primary focus is really on the horizontal flow of value across the organization. I think this is just generally true, that value flows horizontally. Organizations are vertical. And by the way, it's not just an organization, it's the distributors, it's the manufacturer, it's the suppliers. There's a long distance from raw material or an idea in development to a product ready to produce, and from raw material to production in producing and distributing the product. So that horizontal flow from the lean Toyota viewpoint is the thing you want to be focusing on. It's really just a matter of where your focal plane is. Are you looking at the verticals or are you looking at the horizontals? Now, Toyota will tell you they've got the best verticals in the world. They got the deepest knowledge. So the idea here is not to get rid of the verticals, indeed strengthen them, but found a mechanism for looking across. And by the way, A3 analysis is a key mechanism. If you read Managing to Learn, you remember that John Shook was told to go and figure out what to do about technical document translation by talking to the engineers who prepared the documents, by talking to the operating people in America who would use them, by talking to purchasing that hired the translators, and by talking to the translator firms about what they did. Told him to map out the process, remembering that he had no authority over any of those people. He was working on a special project team to set up the NUMMI plant in California. None of those people reported to him. And so his boss said, lead as if you have no authority, because you have no authority. And you will be able to lead because you will know more than anyone about how value should flow and also how currently value does flow. So that's the lean approach. Second kind of idea that in the modern world, the org chart is really important. And you have these grants of managerial authority within boxes, and those tend to be vertical grants of authority. And in the Toyota world, yes, they have some authority. The director of engineering really is the director of engineering, and all the engineers have direct report to that manager. But there are clearly assigned grants of responsibility to solve problems or to deploy on new things. So that's something new, that a person, one person, for example, the chief engineer for a car, who by the way has no direct reports, no one reports to the chief engineer, is told to listen to the customer and design a product the customer will love and the company can make money on. So that's just different from do what I say, top-down vertical authority. Line managers in the modern world judged on performance at the end of the period for their span of control, and in recent times increasingly financial. And the higher level manager says you are empowered. You are empowered to make your numbers. And what they don't say, but what they mean is do what it takes. I don't quite know what you're going to do this, but do what it takes. I have personally, in modern times, stood out in companies at the end of the reporting period and watched people cook the numbers right in front of my eyes. And everybody knows what's going on. It's amazing. Everybody knows everybody's lying. And then you say, hey, did you realize everybody's lying? And they say, oh yeah, that's how we do it here. You got to make your numbers. That's my bonus. So everybody's making their bonus. And it's just a very sad thing to watch. Let's take an alternative. The lean alternative is that line managers are judged on the state of their process. With rapid feedback loops and dialogue, what's the current state of the process you're managing? What's the gap with what it needs to be? What are you, Mr. Manager, down below, planning to do to change and improve the process? And how can I, the manager up above, help you? It's just a very different conversation. As I say at Toyota, if the process is right, the results will be right, so manage by process rather than results. What I didn't write down here, but you also say, if the process hasn't changed, but the results have improved, well, then somebody's lying, because in logic, it just can't be any other way. Planning and direction in the modern world from the top down. And that kind of reinforces the compliance focus. We've got a great plan. I know it's a great plan because I, the top dog, have figured it out. And so therefore, your job is to make it work or to have a really good explanation for the variances. And some people have careers on being brilliant variance explainers. I've always got a reason, and it typically involves everyone but that person. There's an alternative, planning and direction in a circular feedback loop, and this is how Hoshin should work. With the boss asking questions and the folks down below giving some answers, and you have some dialogue. So, by the way, you will have these slides. So, and by the way, you've got practically an infinite airplane ride to Japan. So you'll have plenty of time after the 7th movie to go through these if you like. So I don't have to read everything. Let's see, conviction from the top. This is the modern world, that a good plan is going to produce the desired results, as opposed to a conviction, and this is really important, that all plans are experiments. They can only be evaluated through the scientific method in the form of PDCA, and then followed by appropriate countermeasures. So that the Toyota folks would say anybody who thinks the plan is actually going to work is an idiot, because planning is invaluable, but plans rapidly become worthless. And the reason is that reality gets a vote, and reality almost always votes against you. So then the question is, having really grasped the original condition, having planned to get to a better condition, looking at what's really happening, looking at the new gap, and then responding to that is really important. By the way, that phrase there, planning is invaluable, plans rapidly become worthless, is what Dwight Eisenhower said, reflecting on the D-Day invasion. That they had a wonderful, brilliant plan, and from the minute they hit the beaches, everything was off because the Germans didn't do what they were supposed to do. But they had a very rapid situation of countermeasures. And in the end, the planning really was valuable to get everything set up. And then the key thing was to realize that it was just an experiment and that you would need probably immediately to introduce countermeasures, which happened. Modern versus lean. Line managers as generalists rotated frequently with weak process knowledge. And here was the real modern management innovation, the staff. So we have line and staff, and the staff will solve problems. The staff will detect problems. The staff will make it unnecessary for managers to actually know anything about the actual process they're managing. But instead, what managers do is build a scoreboard. They keep score. They reward those who make their numbers. They punish those who don't. And look, that's an extreme statement, I understand. But in fact, it's striking as I go through big organizations and I meet lots of line managers, and simple questions about how their process works, they can't answer. It's really pretty interesting. And the lean Toyota alternative was that line managers are on extended assignments. They don't do the kinds of rotations that we're sort of used to. Nothing bad about your career of staying in the same function your entire career. They don't rotate people across functions. And just steadily becoming more knowledgeable about how the process works so that you have this deep knowledge, which means you actually don't need the extensive staff support. Now, we've understood some things about this system when it came across the Pacific, but one thing we didn't get was because the OMC, that's the Operation Management Consultants at Toyota, that's the group that Taiichi Ohno founded in 1967, led by Mr. Suzumura. We saw their efforts as being so colorful and so dramatic, doing rapid Kaizen to improve suppliers, that we didn't take the time to understand what the line managers did. And also to understand that that OMC activity was really a transitional activity when they had to go very quickly to dramatically reconfigure specifically suppliers. That was a one-time thing. That then Kaizen of a more usual sort kicked in, which would be led by the line managers, not by the OMC people. Subsequently, Toyota changed the name of that group from the Operation Management Consulting Division to the Operations Management Development Division. So that said, instead of a stern sensei with samurai swords who tell people what to do, that the purpose of the OMDD was to develop line managers so they can do it themselves. And by the way, you do that through repetitive acts of Kaizen, repetitive countermeasuring of problems so that you get back to basic stability. So we just misunderstood that. And we built an enormous consulting industry of folks who are going to run around telling line managers what to do and going to just solve problems. And hey, I plead guilty. I was there in the early days. I didn't really understand it either. And in the Lean Thinking book, there's an awful lot of praise of kamikaze Kaizen. And by the way, including Atlantic, you can ask Gene Cunningham about that on the trip. And but hey, that was great. They did kamikaze Kaizen at Atlantic to go from a process village layout to cells for product families. That was a wonderful thing. Dramatically reduced lead time, freed up lots of labor, but it was a one-time thing. And then what they discovered at Atlantic was that they couldn't really do any more. And indeed, it was very hard to sustain that because the line managers were waiting for the sensei to show up and get things sorted out again. And that is a dependency that is not productive. How do you develop managers? Well, modern management world, and done a lot of work in business schools, have been big beneficiaries of this. The idea is that you develop managers through formal education. You develop them through sink or swim rotations. And that's just a pretty awful way to develop managers. By the way, Toyota doesn't send any of its employees to business schools. They wouldn't do it on a bet. They typically try not once they've established themselves in a new location where they have to have some lateral hires because they just don't have enough people to run the company. But they want to bring you in at age 18 or 22 They want to work with you for life, and they want to make you a lean manager through this process of doing Hoshin and doing A3 and doing daily management. So it's, it's just different. Now, by the way, I'm not quite sure on this trip exactly what we're doing here, whether we're being modern managers. I'm looking at Matt, and we're just running these guys through, like on a separate assembly line through Toyota, so that somehow or other they magically will be transformed, or we're actually going to do this in a more thoughtful way and have some really good discussion about what's really going on here. So that's the modern way, is through formal education, often outside the company. By the way, consultants are an important transmission mechanism that the McKinsey kids who came from the business schools get exposure to a whole bunch of companies, and then you hire one because supposedly they know everything, which, by the way, is what they told you. So therefore, that's how high-end consulting fits into this, not Kaizen consulting, but high-end consulting. The alternative there in the italics at the bottom, managers developed through in-company Gemba learning. As I say, repetitive Hoshin, A3 analysis, standardized daily management. And I just believe very strongly that that's a much better way to go, but it takes time. And you have to think of your people as assets rather than cost. And particularly as companies get into trouble, they tend to think of their real problem with their employees is they cost too much and you got too many of them. And that's very different from the Toyota approach. Don't know whether we'll talk about it very much there, but during the big, great, deep recession, 2008-9, Toyota had put a lot of cash aside, and they tried not to lay off anybody in the whole world. They do have some contract temporary workers in the plants, and so those, they didn't necessarily renew the contracts, but in the whole world, nobody was laid off as a permanent employee during the recession, and at the bottom of it, they had lost half of their sales. So it was a big, big amount of money that they put into saying, well, we can't make any cars, why don't we do more Kaizen? And that's just a different stance toward your people. Modern versus lean. Again, I've observed this so many times in my career that decisions are made far from the point of value creation by analyzing data, what we call conference room management. It is the rare company that I visit that doesn't want to take me to the conference room for the PowerPoint show before we go anywhere near anything that actually creates value. And so I always say, hey, look, just turn the projector off. Let's just go see something. And it's just kind of a mental thing they do that they really shouldn't. Instead, what we would like to do is make decisions at the point of value creation, which is where we get to go see. And then we do that, of course, they ask why and show respect. And what we want to do when we do that is convert data into facts. That one of Ono's best sayings was that he liked facts, liked data, but what he really needed were facts. And what he meant were data that were timely, that were actually relevant to the problem, and which were true, which had not been cooked. So that's a fact. That's the difference between a data and a fact, that it's relevant, timely, and true. And you can only know that for sure if you go see. So, get out of the conference room and go see. And actually, one of the most interesting things that happened to me in the last few years was going to a company on the day that the new ERP for the sales process crashed, and they totally lost sight both of orders and of their supplies. And sitting in a windowless conference room with the CEO and all the direct reports talking about what to do. And it turned out, I was just standing by the wall listening, that there wasn't a single person who understood even conceptually how the ERP worked. And yet they were coming up with orders that they were going to transmit on how we're going to fix this. And, I was just thinking, my gosh, civilization has no future, but there it was. So let's not do that if we can help it. Who does, in the modern management world, problem solving and improving? And the answer is you have a staff. You have the operational excellence staff, you have the continuous improvement staff, you have the quality staff, you have the industrial engineering staff, you have the manufacturing engineering staff. And often done through programs with endpoints or as a special emergency. Everybody stand back, here come the guys from industrial engineering, they'll figure this out. That's one way to run a company. There's an alternative, the lean way. Problem solving improvement should be done by line managers who may be given special responsibility for cross-functional analysis using A3 when that is actually relevant to the issue. And then you still can have staffs. It's okay if you're an OpEx person or a CI person, quality person, that's fine. But those folks, at least in the lean world as I see it, should be reserved for unique problems that really do require a lot of data. You know, that's the DMAIC Six Sigma kind of thing. Or sometimes you really need those projects. And yeah, it takes 6 months, but that's the only way in something that has a lot of quantitative complexity to do it. Nothing wrong with that. But most problems can actually be addressed by people on the line if they have been over time taught how to do various sorts of problem solving and improvement. Modern versus lean standardization of work, if any, I say, is conducted by staffs, often with little GIMBA interaction and with pro forma staff audits. I've been spending a lot of time in recent years in the office, for example, an insurance company, and looking at what people do, how they do their work. And it turns out there are always SOPs, standard operating procedures, that have been developed by staff teams or consultants, which, by the way, never work because they were developed by people who don't do the work. And so the work is actually done through a large number of workarounds. And I mean, what a sad thing. And these workarounds need to be secret, sort of, because they're not really supposed to exist. You're supposed to do it the right way. And so therefore people have their crib sheet, their knacks, just like in the old days of skill trades, that permit them to do the work. It also gives them a little bit of power because no one else has figured out the workaround. And so if the boss comes in and says, you're one of the people who's going to be kicked out here in the downturn, well, you hope that nobody knows how to run the process and they will have to reconsider. So what a shame. The Toyota lean approach, standard of work, is a great thing. All work should be standardized, but this should be done by the line manager in collaboration with the work teams. And then the auditing is an actual, not check boxes, it's go stand and observe the work. Every boss ought to periodically just stand there and watch how people are doing their work. And this is not critical, it's not gotcha. And then let's talk. It seems like the way we're trying to do it isn't working very well. Hey team, what do you think we ought to do instead? One of my favorite moments in life was in a big insurance company with the COO. And we went out to watch how a very complex process, it was writing insurance policies for small employers, how this was done. And it was on a campus with 6,000 people and went through 6 buildings, all electronic, of course, no paper. And we got about halfway through to a young woman who was putting the numbers supplied by the actuaries or whatever they're called that calculated the amount of money to charge in the formula. And I said to her, what are you doing? And she said, oh, I'm putting in the numbers. And I said, well, where did you get those numbers? And then she looked both ways, not realizing that the guy with me was the COO, and said, oh, I just make them up. They're always late coming down from building 6. So I've got a deal with building 9 that I just plug in numbers that will go through the gate, and then they take them out and put the real numbers in over in building 9. So the CEO, who had been there 30 years, but clearly didn't know anything about the work, started to say something. I grabbed him and I said, well, gee, have you got other of these things you do? And she reached behind the screen and pulled out a notebook that had 300 pages of workarounds, very carefully written down. And I said, does everybody else have a book? Well, sure, that's how we do it. You can't, the SOPs don't mean anything. Now that may have been an extreme case, I don't know, but I thought, wow. Now, by the way, I just grabbed the COO and gave him a bear hug and said, let's go out and get some fresh air. And then when we got outside, I said, you realize this is the system you designed. It's working exactly the way it was designed to work, as Deming said, and it can't do better than what it's doing. So anyway, we don't want to do that. We would like to have a collaborative process of standardizing work, but the line managers have to have enough knowledge and skill to be able to help with standardization. And then the work team has to believe this is not just being done to punish them or to keep them under tight control. Let's see, final thing, modern versus lean management. It's amazing how good going fast is thought to be. Everybody will tell you I'm a quick study. I can figure these things out. That's my job as a manager. And what that means is that you jump to solutions. And then the consequence is that you actually wind up going slow through a complete cycle of product development, launch, production. So you go fast in the end to go slow versus you go slow at the beginning in order to go fast. And that's to say, start very clearly with the problem, consider many potential countermeasures in parallel at the same time. And it turns out if you spend time at the front end and you have a good process, that you can go faster to get all the way to the end. So that anyone who used to watch the old Toyota development process where they went through the grasp the situation deal and the concept paper that the chief engineer would prepare takes a lot of time, an enormous amount of discussion. And when American and European companies first looked at this, they said, this is crazy. How can they ever get anything done? And then it turned out they could get it done a year or a year and a half faster, because as you got into it, you didn't have all the backflows and rework and second thoughts and just discovering that no one had ever actually talked about the key points. So therefore, go slow in order to go fast is what the lean manager says, as opposed to the modern manager who says, I'm a quick study, let's go fast, we'll figure this out, and jumps to solutions. So modern versus lean, strong emphasis in the modern world on the vertical authority. And in the lean world, a strong emphasis on the horizontal flow of value, looking toward the customer. So that you could argue, I believe this is really true, that Alfred Sloan set out to get control, but to keep flexibility by empowering people to do whatever they thought they ought to do. And the lean method actually has more control when you think about it than modern, because there's this endless dialogue about what's really going on here, what the work really is, how the work is really being done. But it's honest dialogue. It's back and forth, not based on hierarchy, but based on a team mentality of we're in this together and we need to solve the problem. And that turns out to be quite flexible. So this sort of faux control where guys have got their charts and their numbers and their scoreboards, and they think they're really in control of something. And I'm standing there as the lean visitor, just saying, my gosh, how could anybody be so naive? So anyway, that's my shtick about that. In result of the particular contest between Toyota and GM was that Toyota won, went from last in a vast industry to the top. And by the way, mostly through managerial innovation, as I view. TPS to me is also about management. It wasn't innovation. And Toyota won mostly with boring products. I didn't drive Toyotas for years and years because they were just so boring. And then in the recall of 2010, I just felt sorry for them because there was actually nothing wrong with the cars, but a great deal wrong with the management response to the political problem. So I actually went out and bought one, even though it was boring. But wait a minute, Toyota in this case grew too fast, and they were expanding across the world at such a rate that they could not create the managers that they needed to run their system the way their system was intended to run. So that in 2010, Toyota totally stopped growth, stopped adding capacity, and spent the last decade getting back to basics and trying to raise a new generation of managers that can manage in the lean Toyota way. That meant, by the way, that Volkswagen is now #1, and GM has fallen back because they've exited so many markets. But the Toyota guys are really happy that they're not #1. No customer, in their view, actually cares whether you're #1. Customers do care whether the product works and it's a good value at a given price point and so forth. Okay, so across the world, now lots of people in the car industry have copied this system or found a functional equivalent, and it's been our job to diffuse these lean ideas across other industries and other countries. And on the trip, I don't think we have any car folks. There might be somebody who does a bit of supplying, but this is not a car folks trip. We've got hospitals, and we've got all kinds of folks making all kinds of things, but it's not about cars. And so that's what we've been up to recently. By the way, just a final note about cars, that is where this came from and where I came from. It's an interesting question. In this new situation where autonomy, alternative energy, hyperconnectivity, and asset sharing have all emerged at the same time, and Toyota is the best at the old way of doing things, is there any reason to think that their management system can get them to the best at the new way of doing things? And the outside world has looked at Toyota, which is the poster child for lean management, and said, hey, it's a great 3% management system. They can take costs down 3% a year for the rest of time, but they can't do creative things, and they can't respond quickly. And so we're now going to find out this lovely contest between Tesla and Toyota, in which Tesla starts out with a traditional management system, which I would predict at some point will get converted to modern management, and maybe sooner rather than later, and always living on the edge, which is where Elon Musk, I think, has to live psychologically. I think he has to be on the edge, versus boring old Toyota that creates real stability before they try significant innovation. And who's going to win? And don't know, but just a final thing about Toyota, which I wanted just to bring to the attention of the group, that supplementary to the management system, they did two things that they decided a long time ago. Number one was that they would be a publicly traded company that was not publicly traded. So the Toyota company was de-integrated in 1947 from one totally vertically integrated business to 300 businesses, all stock market traded. You can buy shares in all of these on the Tokyo market, but very carefully done so that the group collectively always has 51% of the shares of every company. And so therefore, they don't really have to pay much attention to markets unless they should suddenly need more cash, which would mean issuing more stock, which would mean dilution of control, which they do not want. So they said, we will never dilute ourselves to the point we lose control because we're here for the long term. We believe in continuity. And that means if we need cash, we will get cash out of the internal operations of the company. So one of the things you will see in Kyushu at Miyata plant in the Obeya area is this year's Hoshin for the Toyota company coming down from Akio. And the number one Hoshin says that the company must address the 100-year disruption in the auto industry caused by autonomy, alternative energy, hyperconnectivity, asset sharing, and that what Akio needs from everybody is cash. And then you will see it all the way down to the assembly line where you'll see a team that's done a Jushiken project to get Akio cash. And it's pretty amazing. And just ask if you could do the same thing in your company. So what they've done is build up a mountain of cash. To get started, General Motors had about 25 billion in cash, and Toyota had 50 billion, and Volkswagen had 25 billion in cash, and Toyota had 50 billion and no debt. And now, I don't know, they got 60 or 70 billion, which any finance professor would say is almost immoral, that they should be leveraging that money or giving it back to the shareholders. And Toyota says, no, no, this is the ballast for our human system, that our people are all assets. We are not going to put people overboard when we hit a down trough. But to do that, we have to have lots of cash. And then that cash for the long term, in this case, permits us to do lots of expensive experiments and also to maintain stability within the organization. So that's not the way most American companies think. They want to leverage their cash. Their people are not assets, they're cost. If things go bad, the first thing you do is start putting people on the side. So just think about that. That is a choice that you all have to some extent. of what your stance toward your assets is and whether you think your people are assets. And we'll all get together in Kyushu at Miyata Plant and take a look at that, and then we can have some good discussion about what you think. So that's traditional, modern, lean. You might see the world in a different way, but just rotate that around in your head and ask yourself about halfway across the Pacific what kind of organization you are, and tell the truth, and what kind of organization you want to be. And not all of you can do anything immediately, but some of you could. And all of you might be able to move the needle a bit in the long term. Okay, Matt.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. Let's take a few minutes here and open it up to questions. There are none in the chat window, so nobody's asked a question yet. But if you do have a question for Jim, we're going to pause for maybe 10 or so seconds to give people a chance to unmute their mic. You can just click the microphone in the bottom left of the control panel and go ahead and ask a question.
Wow.
Third straight webinar with no questions.
Yeah, is this good or bad? What do you think this means?
I don't know what it means.
Should we do some analysis
I don't know
here?
what it means. No,
Oh,
we're going to have
okay.
to root cause this because we do plan on speaking at some point during the week. So hopefully we'll be a little bit more talkative when we're together. But that's okay. Questions are not mandatory. This is not a test or anything like that. Everybody gets to stay on the bus whether they ask a question or not now. So I'll say we can go ahead and wrap it up. I'm going to repeat the final notes that I shared with the last webinar because they are, I think, important. Please go ahead and print out that Japan guide I've been promoting. It has some handy addresses in Japanese, so you can make your way very easily to the hotel from the airport. Just show it to the taxi driver. Also, I will launch that WhatsApp group next week. So if you don't have WhatsApp on your phone, please put it on your phone so we can get things booted up there. For maybe the 100th time, I will remind you that safety shoes are required at these plants. So if you don't have them, please get a pair. Also, not everybody has answered our questions asking for learning objectives. Everybody's answered the basic info questionnaire, so thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. It's very helpful. But please tell us what your learning objectives are. This is as much for us as it is for you. We expect your objectives, your problem to solve, to change over the course of the week as we learn at the plants. Otherwise, have a safe journey to Japan. If you have any questions come to mind about how to get there or concerns about getting there, just give me a call or shoot me an email. Otherwise, I think we're okay to wrap it up. So thanks everybody again for joining, and we'll see you in Japan soon.
See you there.
Bye-bye.